speech project number 4, focusing on speaking clearly and effectively, being very intentional in doing so. He is actually Tanzanian in background, even though he was born in the UK, and has recently moved to Charlotte from New York City. That's correct. He is a Syracuse grad. No applause? No? Syracuse? He is a Syracuse grad and has worked in Wall Street and been a Toastmaster for over 6 months. He has a business doing real estate as well as business coaching, and he is hoping that through becoming an inspirational speaker, that he will be able to add that skill to his business portfolio. And it is with my great pleasure that I introduce Aziz. The topic of his speech tonight is, As We Gather Together, America's Biggest Religious Experience. Aziz.
Good evening, fellow Toastmasters. This past Sunday, I did something that I hadn't done in a very, very long time. I actually got dressed and I went to church. I hadn't been to church in years. And it's not because I'm not a religious person, because I do believe in God. It's just that I'm not a church-going person. It's not somebody who's going to go every Sunday or religiously go every single week. I'm not assiduous in my church-going activities. But I did go to church this past Sunday, which is a little bit interesting also because I grew up in a Muslim household. My parents are both Muslims. But the one thing that they both did with us as kids was they never emphasized their beliefs on us. I mean, they told us about Islam, and we practiced a few of the holidays. Let's say Ramadan, they tell you this is what this is all about, etc., etc. But they pretty much left it up to us to kind of find out as much information as possible and see what we wanted to do with it. So I always grew up curious about religion. When I was older and living in New York, I had a friend of mine who was Jewish. And so I wanted to find out about the Jewish religion. And I went to him and I said, what do you guys believe and why do you believe it and how do you go through your rituals and so on? So he invited me to the synagogue and I went and sat through a ritual. I talked to the rabbi, got a brief idea of what Judaism is all about, just for the information purposes. I had another friend who was a Buddhist. She did the same thing. Come down, talk to the instructor there and find out exactly what Buddhism is all about. So, like I said, I've always been very curious about religion and how it's practiced, the rituals and so on. As I was thinking about what I was going to talk about tonight, I started thinking, what is the biggest religious collective experience that we have here in the United States? I mean, I know we're predominantly a Christian country, but Christians have different denominations, so, people get caught up in that, Methodist, Presbyterian, Catholic, etc. And then it hit me. The biggest religious experience that we observe as a nation is coming up this Sunday. It's the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is this country's biggest religious experience, collectively. I mean, think about it. We're going to gather together in different homes, right? We're going to bring our food. We're going to bring our drink. We're going to be with friends. We're going to celebrate. And even if you don't sit in the group, even if you watch it by yourself, by tuning in and watching the game, you are spiritually getting connected to the game. Okay? And football has its saints. If you've never heard of Vince Lombardi, Coach Vince Lombardi, you will hear it if you watch the Super Bowl on Sunday. Vince Lombardi was a famous coach. He had a great winning record. And he's the guy who said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. He's also the guy who said, show me a good loser, and I'll show you a loser. That pretty much is the fabric of what America is all about. We're very competitive. We want to win at all games. So St. Vincent is Vince Lombardi. In fact, the trophy that's going to be awarded after the Super Bowl is the Vince Lombardi Trophy. So he's one of the saints of our religion, our national religion. We have David and Goliath during the Super Bowl. The history of the Super Bowl has Joe Namath, who was a quarterback for the Jets. Nobody expected him to win the game. He played against a team that was the best team, one of the best in history. And somehow the Jets won that game. So he would be our David. The Baltimore Colts would be our Goliath. So we have that story. We have fighters and warriors and princes like Joe Montana. If you've never heard of Joe Montana, you will probably hear his name during the Super Bowl. He's the winningest quarterback in Super Bowl history. He's won 5 of them. He's never lost. Always came through in the clutch. So all these religious connotations follow through in what we experience as a nation. And then the terminology. How many people have heard of the Hail Mary pass? Okay. For those who don't know, the Hail Mary pass is you throw the ball up in the air, you say a Hail Mary, and you hope somebody catches the ball so that you win the game. And it really came about that way. The announcer was announcing the game, and he said, the only way this team is going to win now is if they throw a ball up in the air and say a Hail Mary and hope somebody catches the ball. Now, if you think about it, there are going to be 75 million pounds of guacamole eaten on Super Bowl Sunday. They're expecting a viewership of between 114 and 120 million people. A 30-second ad during the Super Bowl will be worth between $4 and $7 million. 30 seconds. Okay? So if you're watching the Super Bowl, there's 3 things you can do. You can pray that your team wins. And if your team loses, you can pray that they come back next year. And if your team didn't make it, you can pray that they work hard enough so that they'll be there playing next year and entertaining everybody else. So as you're watching the game this Sunday, think back and start seeing all the religious symbolism. The dancing girls, or the choir, the halftime show, the cheerleaders. That is America's religious experience.